Dark specks exploded across the horizon. I pressed my eye to the rangefinder and felt my heart hammer as I counted them. 10, 20, 50, 100, more enemy planes than I had ever seen in one sky. The morning sun of April 6, 1945, threw long shadows across the Pacific, but those shadows vanished as wave after wave of Japanese planes dove at our fleet like angry hornets. My hands found the familiar grips of the 5-inch gun mount. The metal was cold even in the tropical heat. The destroyer USS Laffey shuddered as her engines moved us into battle formation. This was the moment we had all feared and drilled for. The Japanese were pouring everything at us, and only God knew if we'd see another sunset. All hands, general quarters. This is not a drill. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, but I was already at my station. Running feet pounded across the steel deck as the crew scrambled into position. Kamikaze attacks had grown worse since we began the Okinawa assault 3 weeks earlier, but nothing had prepared us for what filled that morning's sky. I was a gunner's mate first class on the destroyer USS Laffey, part of Rear Admiral Morton Dio's fire support group off Okinawa. We had been shelling Japanese positions for days, covering the Marines and soldiers fighting inland. Now the enemy was bringing the fight to us. The Laffey was a Fletcher-class destroyer, 376 feet of steel, armed with 5-5-inch guns and many 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft mounts. We thought we could handle anything the Japanese threw at us. Watching that black cloud grow, I wasn't so sure. "Range 4,000 yards and closing," called Petty Officer Martinez from the radar. His voice was steady, but we all heard the tension. These pilots were not planning to return. They were kamikazes, men who meant to die and take as many of us with them as they could. "Load high explosive," I shouted to my crew. The breech clanged open and Seaman Thompson rammed a fresh shell home. The weight of the shell settling into place gave me a small, grim comfort. We had practiced this 1,000 times, but practice had never shown us this sight. Captain Frederick Beckton's voice came over the ship's loudspeaker. "Men, this is the big one. They're sending everything they've got. Every gun better be singing or we're all going swimming with the fishes." The first wave hit at 0830. 6 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters screamed out of the sun, wings flashing as they rolled into their final dives. I turned the elevation wheel and tracked the lead aircraft as it dove toward the destroyer USS Bush, about 2,000 yards off our starboard bow. Fire! The 5-inch gun bucked and sent a high explosive shell screaming after the Zero. The shot was a blast you felt deep in your chest. Around us, every gun in the fleet opened up. The sky filled with black bursts of flak and bright tracer lines. The lead Zero took a direct hit at 800 feet and blew apart in a fireball, metal raining down like deadly confetti. Its wingman kept coming, aiming at Bush's bridge. At the last second, the destroyer's 40mm guns shredded the attacker's wing. The plane cartwheeled into the sea 50 yards from Bush's hull, sending a towering column of water and debris. "Chew him down!" someone shouted from a nearby mount. Even as we celebrated that kill, more planes were diving out of the high clouds. Many more. They had launched Kikusui No. 1, the first of 10 huge kamikaze storms meant to smash our invasion fleet. Later intelligence would show that aircraft from Kyushu, Shikoku, and the Japanese mainland, hundreds of kamikazes plus conventional attack planes, took off before dawn with one mission: sink the American fleet or die trying. We didn't know the numbers then. All we knew was the sky was full of enemy planes and they were coming straight for us. The second wave arrived at 0845, low and fast, skimming the waves to avoid radar. I spotted 4 Nakajima B-6N torpedo bombers first, their shapes clear even from 2 miles out. "Torpedo bombers bearing 090 distance 2000, I called. Our gun director swung into action and the mount tracked the incoming flight. The lead bomber headed for the destroyer Coalhound, a minesweeper anchored about a mile away. Captain Beckton ordered hard left to bring our broadside guns on the attackers. "Commence firing!" The deck trembled as our 5-inch guns hammered round after round. Shell casings clattered while Seaman Thompson and his team kept the rhythm. Load, close breach, fire, eject, load. The second bomber took a direct hit at 500 yards. The shell tore through the engine and detonated inside. The plane disintegrated, aluminum and steel raining into the sea. The others kept coming. The lead bomber dropped its torpedo at 800 yards from Coalhound. It hit the water and began its deadly run. But the bomber had flown too straight and too level. Coalhound's 40mm guns found it, and the Nakajima exploded in midair, its wreckage splashing down just ahead of where its own torpedo ran. The torpedo ran true, but the Coalhound's captain was watching. At the last moment, the minesweeper turned hard to port, showing its narrow stern, and the torpedo passed harmlessly along her starboard side, its wake trailing through the blue water. By Hero 900, we had already downed 15 enemy planes, but more kept coming. Wave after wave of kamikazes plunged out of the morning sky, aiming for every American ship they could find. The destroyer Bush, which had survived the first attack, was hit badly during the third wave. The first strike ripped a huge hole in her hull, and she began to list to starboard. "Bush is hit bad," our signalman called. Through my binoculars, I saw smoke and flames pouring from her superstructure. Her crew fought to save the ship, but it looked grim. Within minutes, a second kamikaze struck Bush's forward gun mount, and the order to abandon ship went out. There was no time to watch her final moments. More planes were already diving at us. A single Yokosuka D4 dive bomber screamed out of the clouds, aiming straight for our bridge. Our 20mm guns opened up, tracers streaking through the air, but the pilot wouldn't change course. At 500 feet, he pulled out and skimmed just above our mast. I could see him. A young man, maybe 20, his leather helmet and goggles making him look like a warrior from another time. For an instant, our eyes met. Then his wing clipped our number 1 stack, and the bomber cartwheeled into the sea off our bow. "That was too close," muttered Seaman Rodriguez. Marshal Passer, his face streaked with sweat and powder burns, steadied his hands and rammed the next round into the breach. We had been at general quarters for over an hour. The strain showed on everyone. At 0930, the fourth wave came. This time, the attackers stayed low, skimming wave tops from several directions to evade radar and overwhelm us with numbers. 6 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers appeared off our starboard bow, tight and low. They weren't carrying ordinary bombs. Their bays were packed with explosives, and their cockpits reinforced for impact. "Bandits bearing 045, distance 1,500 yards, our radar operator called. Every gun that could bear on them opened fire. The sea around the incoming bombers erupted as our shells found the range. The lead Betty took a 5-inch round in the nose and vanished in smoke and debris. The second caught tracers across its wing. Fuel poured out and the wing burst into flames, and then it rolled over and crashed. The third reached within 200 yards of our hull before a 20mm burst hit the cockpit. It nosed down and slammed into the water, throwing up a geyser that drenched our forward crews. The fourth passed so low I could see the rivets on her skin, then crashed into the destroyer Nukem a half-mile away. The explosion was enormous. Black smoke and orange flames shot high, and even at our distance we felt the heat. Nukem sat by the bow, and her crew scrambled with damage control gear. The fifth Betty never made it. Chief Petty Officer Williams, on one of our twin 40mm mounts, scored a perfect deflection at 400 yards. Shells tore the bomber apart midair. "5 down!" he called, voice hoarse from shouting orders. Sailors cheered around the deck, but I kept watching the horizon. It wasn't over. By 1000, the pattern had become a grim routine. Planes would pop up on radar, we'd shoot some down, and more would appear. The Coalhound, which had survived the torpedo earlier, was not so lucky in the 6th wave. 3 kamikazes struck her in quick succession, one in the bridge, one amidships, and one in the aftergun mount. She broke in two and sank in less than 10 minutes. From my mount on Laffey, I watched good men die. Sailors who'd shared coffee with me that morning, who'd shown photos of their loved ones now swimming in burning oil or trapped below decks. The water around the sinking ship was crowded with life rafts and swimmers, but enemy planes kept attacking, making rescue almost impossible. Seaman Thompson stared at Coalhound's last moments, pale despite the sun, and whispered, "How many of them are there?" I had no answer. None of us did. All we could do was keep firing and hope our ammo would last. The 7th wave hit from the northeast at 10:30. The Japanese had changed tactics again, approaching in loose, weaving formations to confuse our gunners. Some came high, some low, some medium, anything to throw off our fire control. But after 2 hours of continuous fighting, our crews had fallen into a deadly rhythm. Rangefinders tracked smoothly, fire control gear calculated leads for us, and shells flew with machine-like precision. A lone Kawasaki Ki-61 dove from 6,000 feet, engine screaming as the pilot pushed the plane beyond its limits. Our 5-inch guns tracked him and fired time-fused shells that burst in dark puffs around the fighter. The pilot rolled and twisted, trying to spoil our aim, but at 2,000 feet a shell exploded beneath him. The blast flipped the Ki-61, tore off most of the left wing, and sent it into a flat spin. It hit the water at more than 200 miles per hour, throwing up a waterspout visible for miles. Even as we marked that kill, 2 more kamikazes dove at the destroyer Gregory, about 800 yards off our port quarter. The first, a Yokosuka P-1Y, took a direct hit from Gregory's forward 5-inch gun at 1,500 feet and exploded. Debris rained over both ships. The second, a Zero, got through. Gregory's helmsman slammed the wheel over to try to avoid the crash, but it wasn't enough. The Zero smashed into the ship's after-superstructure just behind the number 2 stack. The blast tore clean through Gregory's hull. I could see light through the twisted metal while smoke poured out. But the crew didn't freeze. Damage control teams were on her fast, fighting fires and plugging holes with hoses and patches. At 1100, the radar finally cleared, and after more than 2 hours, the guns fell quiet. The silence felt almost as loud as the fighting. Captain Beckton asked for an ammunition report, and gun captains started calling out what they had left. We were already low. Service lockers were nearly empty, and men were hauling up rounds from the magazines as fast as they could. I used the short comm to check my team. Thompson was loading the ready rack with 5-inch shells, his hands moving by habit. Rodriguez was cleaning spent brass. Chief Williams was inspecting the bore on his 40mm to make sure it hadn't overheated. "How you holding up, Chief?" I asked. He looked up, face streaked with sweat and powder residue. "Could be better, could be worse," he said with a tired smile. "Those pilots don't give up." All around, the fleet was taking stock. A couple of destroyers were gone with many of their men. Gregory floated but was badly hurt. The minesweeper Emmons had taken hits and was barely keeping afloat. Other ships showed damage from near misses and strafing, but we were still fighting. The Japanese seemed to be running out of planes finally. At 11:30, a small 8th wave showed on the radar. Only a dozen aircraft, a mix of fighters and light bombers coming in low. Our combat air patrol met them first. 6 F-4U Corsairs from USS Essex dove down from 10,000 feet and tore into the attackers. The Corsairs were faster and better armed, and the fight was one-sided. Through my binoculars, I watched 50 caliber streams rip the lighter Japanese planes apart. In minutes, 8 of those 12 were in the water. 4 kamikazes got through. They split up, each picking a different target. A battleship, a cruiser, a transport carrying Marines, and then one came straight for us. "Here he comes!" I yelled and swung the elevation wheel. Every gun that could bear opened up. Tracers cut through the air, 20mm barrels glowed from firing, and our 40mm mounts walked their bursts up toward him. At about 800 feet, a 40mm hit the Zero's engine and smoke poured out, but the pilot kept his dive. At 400 feet, our 5-inch fired its last round, and the concussion flipped the fighter into a roll. It hit the sea 50 yards off our hull in a geyser of water and burning fuel. "Splash one," someone called. Men cheered and slapped each other on the back, but I kept watching the water. For a second I thought I saw a helmet float, then the swell closed and it was gone. The 9th and 10th waves were small. Damaged survivors picked off by our fighters and ship guns. By noon, the last kamikaze from that day's attack had been downed, and the radar stayed clear. The ocean was scattered with wreckage, aluminum shards, engine parts, scraps of cockpit fabric. The water shimmered with oil and aviation fuel, rainbow patterns glinting on the swells. As damage reports came in, the full scale of the fight came into focus. The Japanese had launched 355 kamikazes and 344 conventional attack planes before dawn, 699 aircraft in all. We shot down more than 350 of them, over half of the attackers. Japan lost pilots and planes it could not easily replace. But our success had a price. 2 destroyers sank, several more ships were badly damaged, and hundreds of American sailors had died. While I picked up empty shell cases around my mount, I kept thinking of the young Zero pilot I'd seen. He couldn't have been much older than my kid brother back home. He'd been willing to die for his emperor, just as we were willing to fight for our country. The difference was I was still here. That afternoon, as we steamed with the ships that remained, Captain Beckton spoke over the intercom. He told us we had just survived the largest air attack in naval history and that we had held our ground. He said every man on board could be proud. He vowed we would stay off Okinawa until the job was done. As the sun sank on April 6, 1945 and painted the sea orange, I stood at my gun and stared at the horizon. I knew more fights would come, more kamikazes and more losses, but that day we had held. The Japanese had gambled everything on Kikusui No. 1 and lost more than 350 aircraft and pilots while our invasion went on. Marines and soldiers were still moving across the island, backed by our naval fire. In the weeks to follow, there would be 9 more Kikusui storms, each smaller as Japan's air arm was ground down. By the end of Okinawa, the Japanese would lose over 4,000 planes, many to ships like the Laffey. We didn't know that then. All we knew was we had survived this storm, and we would be ready for whatever came next. As I scrubbed the 5-inch gun for the night, my mind wandered home. I pictured the small Ohio town where I grew up, my parents reading the papers about the war, and the girl I'd promised to marry when this was over. They felt a world away, separated from this drifting steel island by thousands of miles and experiences they could never imagine. Still, they were why we stood watch on the Pacific, why we faced kamikazes without flinching. We were fighting for more than maps or positions. We were fighting so people back home could live in peace. The young Japanese pilots who died that day believed in something sacred too. Their emperor, their country, the honor of their ancestors. I could respect that belief even though they tried to kill me and my shipmates. War turns men into enemies who, in other lives, might have been friends. Understanding that didn't mean giving up. The militarists who started this war had to be stopped, and if it took the full force of our Navy, Marines, and Army, then that's what we would use. Under the stars, I wrote my last log entry for April 6, 1945. All guns secured, ammunition replenished. Crew exhausted but in good spirits. Enemy air attacks repelled with heavy losses to the enemy. Ship's company performed magnificently under fire and ready for whatever tomorrow brings. Tomorrow would bring more tests of courage. But that day proved something important. Trained and equipped American sailors could meet any challenge. We had turned back the largest kamikaze attack so far, and the invasion of Okinawa went on. In the weeks ahead, there would be more Kikusui attacks, smaller each time as Japan's air force was worn down. We didn't know all that then. For now, we had held the line, done our duty, and were ready to do it again. In the quiet before dawn on April 7th, I stood the midwatch and thought of the roughly 350 Japanese pilots who would never see another sunrise. They died as warriors by their code, but their deaths gained them nothing. Their empire was crumbling, their cities bombed, their cause lost. Still, I respected their conviction. The tragedy was that they believed in conquest and glory instead of peace and building a future. As the eastern sky began to lighten, I promised myself that when this ended, I would go home to Ohio. I would marry the girl, raise children, maybe take over my father's farm. I wanted to build life instead of destroy it and to remember how precious peace is. When the sun rose on April 7, 1945, the Pacific was clear of enemy aircraft. Radar screens stayed quiet and our guns were silent. For the first time in weeks, we could stand down from general quarters during daylight, though we stayed ready. If the Japanese returned in force, we would be waiting, guns loaded and resolve unshakable. We were the United States Navy and we did not yield the sea to anyone.